On June 4, 2020, the Federal Railroad Administration, or FRA, issued the Draft Environmental Impact Statement and Draft Section 4F Evaluation for the Washington Union Station Expansion Project. The Draft Environmental Impact Statement, or DEIS, can be found online at the address shown on the slide. Public review and comment on the DEIS is an important aspect of the Environmental Impact Statement process. This presentation provides a high-level overview of the project and of the contents of the DEIS. First, I will briefly describe the project and the Environmental Impact Statement process. After an overview of how the DEIS is organized, I will summarize the alternatives that are analyzed in the document. I will then explain how the impacts of these alternatives were assessed and highlight a few major impacts identified in the DEIS. I will also say a few words about the Section 106 and Section 4F documentation included in the DEIS. I will explain measures FRA has identified that would avoid, minimize, and mitigate adverse impacts. And finally, I will conclude with a summary of the various ways to submit comments. The Washington Union Station Expansion Project is proposed by Union Station Redevelopment Corporation and the National Railroad Passenger Corporation, better known as Amtrak. Union Station Redevelopment Corporation is a non-profit organization that manages Washington Union Station for FRA. The federal government owns the station, including the existing bus facility and parking garage. Amtrak owns the rail infrastructure, including the tracks and platforms. The project would expand and modernize Union Station's multimodal transportation facilities in order to meet the project purpose, which are to support current and future long-term growth in rail service, achieve compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act, facilitate intermodal travel, provide a positive customer experience, enhance integration with the adjacent neighborhoods, businesses, and planned land uses, sustain Union Station's economic viability, and support continued preservation and use of the historic station building. The project is needed to improve rail capacity, reliability, safety, efficiency, accessibility, and security for both current and future long-term railroad operations at Union Station. The horizon year for project planning is 2040. The National Environmental Policy Act of 1969, known as NEPA, requires federal agencies to consider the environmental impacts of their major actions. NEPA also requires that agencies involve the public in their decision-making. NEPA requires federal agencies to prepare an Environmental Impact Statement, or EIS, when an action would have significant impacts on the human environment. Under NEPA, the human environment includes the natural and physical environment and the relationship of people with that environment. An EIS also identifies measures to avoid, minimize, or mitigate potential impacts. Finally, it describes applicable federal, state, and local environmental laws and regulations. Once complete, the draft EIS is made available for public review and comment. After the public review, the agency prepares a final EIS that addresses the comments received on the draft EIS. Finally, the agency's decision is documented in a record of decision. The record of decision also defines the measures the agency will implement to avoid, minimize, or mitigate the adverse impacts of the action. The Washington Union Station Expansion Project DEIS has 12 chapters, as listed on this slide. While all the chapters contain important information, chapters 3 through 5 are the heart of the DEIS. Chapter 3 explains how FRA and the project proponents developed a reasonable range of alternatives for analysis in the DEIS. Chapter 4 describes the environment that these alternatives would affect. Chapter 5 presents the potential impacts of the alternatives on this environment, along with the measures to avoid, minimize, or mitigate adverse impacts that FRA is considering. The DEIS also includes 30 appendices containing detailed background information, Two of these appendices, Appendix C2 and C3, present a more in-depth description of the information contained in Chapters 4 and 5, respectively. The DEIS evaluates 6 action alternatives, including one with 2 options, as well as the no action alternative. All action alternatives consist of the same elements as shown on the next slide. All the action alternatives have several elements in common. Each includes preserving the historic station building, reconstructing all tracks and platforms, constructing 4 new concourses, improving pedestrian and bicycle access, including new station entrances on 1st, 2nd, and 8th Street Northeast, and providing new and improved locations for pickup and drop-off operations by for-hire and private vehicles. The 6 action alternatives differ with respect to the train hall, the bus facility, and the parking facility. In all action alternatives, these 3 elements would be within the footprint of the existing rail terminal between the back of the historic station building and K Street Northeast. However, their exact location, size, or orientation would vary. In all action alternatives, the federally owned air rights above the rail terminal that would not otherwise be used for project elements would be available for future potential development. In the following slides, I will briefly describe each action alternative. Alternative A is characterized by a north-south train hall between the 8th Street Bridge and the back of the historic station building. The bus and parking facilities would be in a combined multimodal surface transportation center located approximately where the existing Union Station garage stands today. The bus facility would have 26 bus slips, compared to 61 today, and there would be parking for approximately 1,750 cars, compared to a total capacity of approximately 2,450 cars today. Vehicular access would be via the 8th Street Bridge. Construction of Alternative A would take approximately 11 years and 5 months. In Alternative A, as in all action alternatives, construction would take place in 4 sequential phases, moving from the east side to the west side of the rail terminal. Alternative B would be similar to Alternative A, except that all parking would be below ground, on 2 levels under the tracks, along the west side of the rail terminal. Approximately 2,000 parking spaces would be provided, with vehicular access via a portal on K Street Northeast under the existing overpass. Construction of Alternative B would take approximately 14 years and 4 months. Alternative C is characterized by an east-west train hall north of the historic station building, 1 level of below-ground parking with 900 spaces, a bus facility located north of the 8th Street Bridge, an above-ground parking facility on top of the bus facility, and a 9-slip bus pickup and drop-off area to the south of the train hall. Vehicular access to the below-ground parking facility would be through a portal under the K Street overpass. Vehicular access to the bus facility and above-ground parking facility would be from the 8th Street Bridge. Construction of Alternative C would take approximately 12 years and 3 months. Alternative C has 2 options. The east option shown here would place the bus facility and the above-ground parking facility on the east side of the rail terminal. The bus facility would have 17 slips, and the parking facility above it would have approximately 750 spaces. Alternative C with the west option would place the bus facility and above-ground parking facility on the west side of the rail terminal. The bus facility would have 19 slips, and the parking facility above it would have approximately 700 spaces. Alternative C with either option identifies 2 areas labeled access zones within the private air rights above the rail terminal. The daylight access zone is the general area where daylighting features, such as skylights, may be established through agreement with the private air rights developer to provide light to the concourse below. These daylighting features would only use a portion of the daylight access zone. The visual access zone is the general location where the air rights developer could provide a visual connection from H Street to the new train hall and the historic station building. The visual access zone may be centered on the historic station building. The access zones are not part of the project but are planned for, so that the project would not preclude them from being developed as part of the private air rights development. The access zones are a common feature of all action alternatives with an east-west train hall. Like Alternative C, Alternative D would provide an east-west train hall north of the historic station building. The bus facility would be wrapped around the train hall at an upper level. It would have 27 slips. Buses would access it via roads connecting to the H Street Bridge. Parking would be provided both above and below ground. Above ground parking would be in a facility above the rail terminal, north of the H Street Bridge and just south of K Street. This facility would have approximately 750 spaces. Vehicular access would be through roads connecting to the H Street Bridge. Below ground parking would be on one level and have approximately 900 spaces, as in Alternative C. Access would be through a portal in the K Street underpass. Construction of Alternative D would take approximately 12 years and 3 months. Alternative E would be similar to Alternative D, except that all parking would be below ground, with approximately 2,000 spaces on 2 levels, as in Alternative B. Construction of Alternative E would take approximately 14 years and 4 months. Alternative AC combines elements of Alternatives A and C. Like Alternative C, Alternative AC features an east-west train hall. Unlike Alternative A, the bus and parking multimodal surface transportation center would be at the approximate location of the existing Union Station parking garage. The bus facility would be capable of accommodating 40 bus slips on 2 levels. If not needed for buses, the second level could potentially be used for other activities such as pickup and drop-off. The parking facility would have capacity for approximately 1,600 cars. Construction of Alternative AC would take approximately 11 years and 5 months. Alternative AC is the preferred alternative. That is, the alternative that FRA believes would best fulfill the purpose and need of the project while balancing impacts on the human environment. FRA and the project proponents developed Alternative AC after considering agency and public comments on the other action alternatives, and to better address these comments while meeting the project's purpose and need, as well as minimizing impacts. FRA may ultimately select any of the action alternatives. FRA may also make modifications to the alternative selected. The DEIS also analyzes the no-action alternative, as required by NEPA. The no-action alternative describes future conditions if the project isn't built. It provides a baseline against which the impacts of the action alternatives can be assessed. The no-action alternative incorporates several foreseeable projects that are independent of the Union Station expansion project and can be expected to be completed by 2040. FRA considered these projects when assessing the impacts of the no-action alternative. The no-action projects include, among others, the replacement of the H Street Bridge by the District Department of Transportation. It also includes multiple rail and station improvement projects, such as the Concourse Modernization Project, which would fully renovate the existing Claytor Concourse. The largest of the no-action alternative projects is the development of the privately owned air rights above the rail terminal. Based on information the owner provided to FRA, the future air rights development in the no-action alternative would include approximately 3.7 million square feet of mixed-use development consisting of office, retail, residential, and hotel. The DEIS assesses different kinds of impacts. Impacts may be beneficial or adverse, direct or indirect. Direct impacts result from the action and occur at the same time and place. Indirect impacts result from the action but are later in time or farther removed in distance while still being reasonably foreseeable. Impacts may be operational or construction related. Operational impacts would last for the foreseeable future after the project is complete. Construction-related impacts would occur only during the construction period and cease when construction is complete. Note that while the project's construction period is quite long, most construction impacts would occur for shorter periods of time during the construction period. The intensity of impacts is assessed as negligible, minor, moderate, or major. The criteria for each intensity may vary from resource to resource. General and resource-specific definitions are provided in the DEIS. As required by NEPA, impacts are assessed relative to no-action alternative conditions, that is, to future conditions without the project. Additionally, the DEIS provides an assessment of impacts compared to existing conditions. This slide shows the resources analyzed in the DEIS. The DEIS describes the impacts of the no-action alternative and the 6 action alternatives on each of these resources. In the following slides, I will highlight some of the major impacts identified in the DEIS. This is only a selection. Please review the DEIS itself for a description of the full range of anticipated impacts on the resources listed here. This table highlights the major beneficial and adverse operational impacts that the project would have on transportation. All action alternatives would have a major beneficial impact on intercity and commuter rail service at Union Station. This is because they would provide sufficient capacity to meet projected 2040 demand and would ensure better conditions for passengers at the station. This would not occur in the no-action alternative, which would have a major adverse impact on rail operations at Union Station. With all action alternatives, the project would also have a beneficial impact on pedestrian circulation in Union Station, thanks to the new concourses and new access points. This beneficial impact would be major in all action alternatives except for alternatives C and D. This is because in these two alternatives, longer walking distances between the bus facility or above-ground parking facility and the front of the station would detract slightly from the benefits of increased circulation space and additional entrances. The no-action alternative would result in a major adverse impact on pedestrian circulation at Union Station. All action alternatives would provide more and improved locations for pickups and drop-offs. In alternatives A and B, however, limited room for queuing next to the new train hall may result in spillover on H Street Northeast during peak times, a major adverse impact. This is not anticipated to occur with the other action alternatives. With the no-action alternative, there would be more pickups and drop-offs with no new locations or improvements, resulting in a major adverse impact. Finally, increased activity at Union Station would generate additional trips of all types to and from the station, including car trips. The DEIS includes an extensive traffic impact analysis, which shows that conditions would deteriorate at several intersections near Union Station in the no-action alternative, as well as in the action alternatives. To illustrate traffic impacts, this slide shows anticipated 2040 levels of service at intersections near Union Station under the no-action alternative and alternative AC respectively. Similar figures for the other action alternatives are provided in the DEIS. Levels of service, which range from A to F, describe how congested an intersection can get during peak traffic times. As can be seen, the most severe conditions, level of service F, shown in red, would occur primarily along North Capitol Street and secondarily along H Street and K Street Northeast. This is true for all alternatives. While traffic generated by Union Station would contribute to these conditions, note that the levels of service shown here reflect growth in all traffic, not just Union Station traffic. The next slide focuses on the specific impacts of each of these two alternatives on levels of service. It shows the intersections that would deteriorate to a level of service F relative to baseline conditions. For the no-action alternative, baseline conditions are existing conditions. For alternative AC, baseline conditions are no action alternative conditions. 6 intersections would deteriorate to a level of service F with a no action alternative relative to existing conditions. They are marked by a red square on the map on the left side of the slide. These intersections include North Capitol Street and H Street, the intersection of the H Street Bridge and the East Side Service Roads, 3rd Street and H Street Northeast, the intersection of Massachusetts Avenue, East Street and 1st Street Northeast, North Capitol Street and Louisiana Avenue, and the intersection of 3rd Street, Massachusetts Avenue, and H Street Northwest. 5 intersections would deteriorate to a level of service F in alternative AC relative to the no action alternative. They are marked by a red square on the map on the right side of the slide. These intersections include Louisiana Avenue and D Street Northwest, 1st Street and Massachusetts Avenue Northeast, North Capitol Street and Massachusetts Avenue, North Capitol Street and K Street, 1st Street and K Street Northeast. Please refer to the DEIS for a description of the full range of traffic impacts in all alternatives. Constructing the project would also cause impacts to the transportation system, including the major adverse impacts summarized in this table. I will highlight 2 of these impacts. First, in all action alternatives except for alternative C with the east option, intercity, tour charter, and sightseeing bus service could not be accommodated at Union Station during Phase 4 of construction. This is because during this phase, the existing parking garage, including the existing bus facility, would be demolished, while the new bus facility would not be available until the end of Phase 4. The duration of this impact would vary depending on the alternative, ranging from approximately 3 years and 1 month in alternatives A and AC to approximately 4 years and 11 months in alternatives B and E. In alternative C with the east option, the new bus facility would be complete by the time the existing one is demolished. Therefore, this major adverse impact would not occur in this alternative. The second major adverse impact I will highlight is the impact on traffic. Construction of the project would generate traffic through the entire construction period, but this traffic would be most intense during periods of excavation, when up to 120 trucks could travel to and from the site each day. This is a conservative estimate, however, which assumes that all excavation spoil would be transported by truck. Use of work trains could greatly reduce truck traffic. Additionally, trucks would comply with district regulations regarding truck routes. Construction trucks would not use local streets. They would travel along 1st or 2nd Street Northeast to reach the nearest designated truck route. Construction of the projects included in the no action alternative would likely result in adverse impacts on transportation as well. Information is not currently sufficient to determine the intensity of these impacts. As part of the DEIS, FRA modeled future noise and vibration levels at multiple receptors near the project. Analysis showed that there would be no major adverse noise and vibration impacts from operations. However, certain construction activities would result in major adverse noise and vibration impacts during certain periods. These activities include supportive excavation construction as well as excavation operations, with supportive excavation construction work being the most impactful. During the construction of supportive excavation walls, vibration levels may exceed the threshold for potential risk of structural damage at 3 or 4 buildings. These buildings are the Union Station Historic Building, the Railway Express Agency Building, also known as the REA Building, which is located on the east side of the rail terminal, the Kaiser Permanente Building, which is located south of the REA Building, and in alternatives B and E only, the National Association of Student Personnel Administrators Building, which is located near K and 1st Streets Northeast. A major impact on noise levels would occur when noise would exceed the threshold for severe adverse impact set in Federal Transit Administration guidance applicable to the project. Noise from supportive excavation construction work would result in major adverse impacts at 25 to 28 modeled receptor locations, depending on the action alternative. The location of these receptors is illustrated on the next slide. This slide shows the receptors that would experience major adverse noise impacts during supportive excavation work in alternative B, which would affect the most locations, and alternative C, which would affect the fewest. These receptors are shown in red on the maps. As can be seen, they are either immediately adjacent to the project or within one city block of it. The last major adverse impacts I will highlight are those to cultural resources. The area around Union Station contains many cultural resources. The analysis considered a total of 55, including buildings, historic districts, and culturally important views. The following types of impacts were considered: physical, visual, noise and vibration, and traffic. While the type of impact may vary depending upon the alternative, 3 cultural resources would experience a major adverse impact: the Washington Union Station Historic Building, the REA Building, and the Washington Union Station Historic Site. The project would permanently affect the physical fabric of Union Station Historic Building and the Union Station Historic Site. It would also permanently alter the visual environment of these 2 resources, as well as that of the REA Building. Further, as previously mentioned, during some construction activities, vibration levels may exceed the threshold for potential structural damage at the Washington Union Station Historic Building and the REA Building. Keep in mind that these impacts would occur only if no avoidance or minimization measures are implemented. In the context of Section 106, about which I will say a few words shortly, FRA is working with the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, the District of Columbia State Historic Preservation Office, and the Section 106 consulting parties to ensure that avoidance, minimization, and mitigation measures are defined and incorporated into future project planning. This slide provides a brief, high-level overview of other major impacts identified in the DEIS. A green check means a major beneficial impact. A red check means a major adverse impact. Note that a blank does not mean no impact, it only means that the anticipated impact would be less than major. Please refer to the DEIS for a detailed analysis of all impacts. Before moving on, there is one major impact I'd like to highlight here: the impact pertaining to environmental justice. Executive Order 12898 requires that federal agencies identify and address disproportionately high and adverse impacts resulting from federal projects on minority and low-income communities. There are data that indicate that minority and low-income persons rely on the bus for intercity travel more than other demographics. Therefore, the DEIS identifies the unavailability of bus service at Union Station during Phase 4 of construction as an impact that would disproportionately affect populations protected under the executive order. This impact would not occur under Alternative C with the East option because the new bus facility would be completed before Phase 4 removes the existing bus facility. In addition to NEPA, FRA must also comply with the requirements of Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. Section 106 requires federal agencies to consider the effects of their actions on historic properties. In accordance with Section 106, FRA initiated consultation with the District State Historic Preservation Office in 2015. FRA worked with the District State Historic Preservation Office to identify Section 106 consulting parties. To date, FRA has held 8 meetings with the consulting parties. With the consulting parties' input, FRA has identified the area of potential effects, APE for short, for the project, identified historic properties in the APE, and assessed the project's effects on those historic properties in a draft assessment of effects report, which is available for public review as Appendix D1 of the DEIS. As explained there, FRA assessed effects on 55 historic properties. 3 historic properties, the Washington Union Station Historic Building, the Washington Union Station Historic Site, and the REA Building, would experience adverse effects because of permanent physical and visual impacts from the project and because of construction-related vibration impacts. Additionally, there could be a potential adverse effect due to increased traffic on the Capitol Hill Historic District. Under Section 106, mitigation measures must be implemented to offset adverse effects if adverse effects cannot be avoided. Because of the very early stage of project design, it is not yet possible to define all avoidance, minimization, or mitigation measures. Therefore, FRA will prepare a programmatic agreement that establishes a process of consultation and review for the next stages of project design. The programmatic agreement will be developed in consultation with the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, the District's State Historic Preservation Office, and the Section 106 consulting parties. As an operating administration of the U.S. Department of Transportation, FRA must comply with Section 4F of the U.S. Department of Transportation Act of 1966. Section 4F prohibits approving a transportation project that would use public parks and recreational lands, wildlife refuges, or public or private historic properties unless certain specific conditions are met, as shown on this slide. Therefore, the DEIS contains a draft Section 4F evaluation that describes how the project would affect resources protected by Section 4F. This is Chapter 6 of the DEIS. The draft evaluation finds that the project would result in a use by permanent incorporation into a transportation facility of 3 historic properties: the Union Station Historic Building, the Union Station Historic Site, and the REA Building. The draft evaluation also establishes that there is no feasible and prudent alternative that would avoid these impacts. This is because they are due to the reconstruction of the rail terminal and the construction of major project elements such as the train hall and the 8th Street Concourse. An alternative that would not include these features would fail to meet the project's purpose and need. FRA will consult with the official with jurisdiction on the 3 affected properties, that is, the D.C. State Historic Preservation Office, to develop and implement measures that would minimize harm to the properties. The draft Section 4F evaluation also identifies a de minimis, meaning minimal or negligible, impact on the Metropolitan Branch Trail during construction of the project. This would be due to temporary partial closures of the trail near Union Station. For each resource, Chapter 5 of the DEIS identifies measures FRA is considering to avoid, minimize, or mitigate the adverse impacts of the project. These measures are also listed in Chapter 7. A few examples are briefly summarized on this slide. For transportation, the DEIS identifies multiple potential measures to avoid, minimize, or mitigate impacts. All these measures would need to be coordinated with key transportation stakeholders, including the District Department of Transportation. An example would be finding a temporary location for bus operations during Phase 4 of construction. Another example would be working with the District Department of Transportation to reduce vehicular trips to and from the station by at least 20%. For noise and vibration, the project proponents would require the construction contractor to develop and implement a construction noise and vibration control plan. The DEIS identifies the type of measures the plan would contain. Examples include a vibration sensitivity assessment of the buildings where a potential risk of structural damage may occur, monitoring vibration levels during construction, and using low vibration equipment if needed. During excavation activities, noise and vibration from construction truck traffic could be reduced by using work trains to haul away spoil and debris. With regard to cultural resources, as previously mentioned, FRA will prepare a programmatic agreement that establishes a process of consultation and review that will continue as project design progresses. Again, this is only a short, abbreviated selection. Please refer to Chapter 7 of the DEIS for a complete list. Public review and comment is a key aspect of the EIS process. FRA encourages you to review the DEIS and provide your comments through one of the means listed on this slide. Note that FRA has extended the original comment review period. All comments must now be submitted on or before September 28, 2020. All comments will become part of the public record. FRA will respond to all substantive comments in the final EIS. Commenters' names and, when applicable, organizational affiliations may be shown, but no other identifying personal information, including personal email addresses, will be published. FRA is coordinating compliance with NEPA and Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. As mentioned previously, the draft Section 106 Assessment of Effects report is appended to the DEIS for public review. The public may provide comments on the draft Assessment of Effects report and concerns regarding historic properties as part of the public comment period for the DEIS through the methods listed on this slide. Thank you again for your interest in the Washington Union Station Expansion Project DEIS. We look forward to your comments.